Buddy, we are going to learn a little bit about making and editing shapes using digital tools. So over the past couple days of content, hopefully you've gotten an understanding between the difference of shape, form, and all the other principles and elements of design. So what we're going to do is kind of hop into Adobe here, and we're going to start with Adobe Photoshop. Now, some of you who haven't used Photoshop before, do not worry. We're going to go from the basics here. Those of you who have experience in Photoshop, stick with me. We'll be able to kind of maybe hopefully encounter and uncover some new advanced techniques for you all. So we're going to start by kind of introducing you to Photoshop. Photoshop is a really powerful program that deals with layered elements, meaning that we can kind of stack different layers and levels, and if we need to go back and change them, it's as simple as going to that specific layer, deleting it, editing it, and going from there. So let's go ahead and get started, and I want you to do the same with me because we're going to work on this together. And we're going to go to File, New, and we're going to create a new Photoshop file. So when we get into the Photoshop document area, we have a few different options. And so if you look at the top, you'll see you have specific options for photo, print, art and illustration, web, mobile, and film and video. Now, one of the common mistakes people actually overlook is taking advantage of especially the film, video, and mobile aspects. You can see here we have all different types of iPads and iPods. We have the resolutions, the PPIs, all sorts of cool things. Use these to your advantage. These are going to be really, really helpful as you all begin to develop, hopefully, video games for mobile apps and mobile games, and for iOS and Android, all of these great things. So at this point in the world, we're developing for screens, so it's really important to kind of have that good base file and not have to resize everything. So for our sake, we're going to keep this pretty simple, and we're going to start kind of with a standard kind of illustrative board, and let's go to Art and Illustration, and let's do 1000 by 1000. And right now it's set to 300 ppi, so this means it's for print resolution. We're going to build for screens, so we can go ahead and lower that to 72 under resolution, and we're going to make sure that we're set in RGB color mode. That's really important. Now, as for background, it's up to you what we use. We're going to actually delete this as we get going, so we'll just leave that as is on white. So go ahead and hit create with your 1000 by 1000 art illustration grid set for 72 dpi. We'll hit create, we get a nice box, and let's start creating some shapes. So there's multiple ways we can create shapes within Adobe or Photoshop. One of the ways is using kind of that layer technology. So you'll see, if you don't see your layers panel, Photoshop's pretty cool because you could just go to Window, Workspace, and go ahead and find Essentials. You can also do the workspace and do reset essentials. So if yours looks a little different than mine, resetting that should now get you to where you're going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and use my layers panel here, and there are multiple ways to make shapes in Photoshop. Now, Photoshop by default is a raster photo program. Raster meaning it uses pixels. So if I hit the Z key and I zoom in, I'm actually 700% in on this image, so I'm using raster imagery. And I can do a lot of different things. I could start by simply using the Marquee tool and using my left mouse button and drawing a circle and actually doing an edit fill with that shape. And I'm going to go ahead and fill this with our foreground color, which is black. And when I do that, you can see I have a circle. Now, that's all fine and great, and I'm going to go ahead and do a deselect, and we'll get into the hotkeys as we go forward. But as I zoom in, you can see kind of the pixelated edge. So we want to kind of avoid that. So let's zoom out again. I'm using my Option key to zoom out, and I'm going to hold and do my undo. So I'm going to go ahead and do step backward here, and that will kind of undo this. And Control D or Command D for deselect to get rid of that. So let's go ahead and set up our grid to our liking here. Let's go ahead and get rid of this background layer. So let's create a brand new layer. It's a little sticky note tab at the bottom right hand corner. We'll grab that, We're going to then drag with our left mouse button the background layer to the trash can on the layers panel. Now we have, you can see it's transparent, being that it has all these little like checkerboard patterns. Now we have layer 1. We're going to double click on layer 1 and call it shape or shapes. Alright, let's start to draw some shapes without the Marquee tool at this point. So let's go down to our shape tool. And our shape tool, you can see, is near the bottom of our toolbar, and we have all sorts of different shapes, and you'll see the letter U next to them. Now a lot of people get a little confused what this means. Well, U is actually the hotkey for this. So if I hit U, it will take me there, just like if I hit V as in Victor, it will take me back up to the move tool. But how do you get all those subtools under U? Well, what you do is hold your Shift key, and then you can cycle while holding Shift. I'm tapping the U key. I can cycle through all those shapes. You'll even notice if you look to the custom shape tool at the very top menu bar here, you have a lot of different custom shapes that you can load. So there's a lot of really neat kind of things in here that you can kind of use special frames, music notes, you name it, talk bubbles, whatever it may be that you can use to your advantage. Now, what's really great about these shapes, and we'll start with just a simple rectangle, is that we have a lot of control over them. So you can see we can control not only the fill, but we can also control the stroke. Now, this little red line through the stroke button basically means there's not going to be a lined outline of this shape. So if I had changed it to red, that means there'd be a red line around it. But right now I want to keep it empty. Here, this is the value that controls the stroke. This controls the different dotted line, dashed lines of the stroke, the height and width of the shape itself. Right now it's set to 0 because we haven't drawn anything. And then we have some really fun tools here that will allow us to combine, merge, do some sort of really cool stuff with the shapes that we make. This also will help us align and distribute, and then move different layers within the shape upwards. So in the end, we can even kind of fix the size of the shape we want to make. So we have a lot of options, but what we're going to do is just, I want you to make sure your canvas is black and white, right here, your background and foreground color. To do that, you just hit the D key on your keyboard, and I want you to hold your left mouse button down and just draw what you think is close to as square as possible. Now you'll see here I was a little off, so I don't have a perfect square, but if I entered 456 there, it would make the adjustments for me as I have it. Now this properties menu opened up, and you can see that we have a couple different options here. We have a live shape property or a mask property. So we could actually use this tool in photo manipulation to mask out specific areas, but that's another tutorial for another day. Alright, so we've just created our first shape. It's pretty basic. How do we edit this shape? To edit this shape, you're going to actually use the arrow. Now, where a lot of people get confused is they think this is the move tool. The move tool is actually up here at the very top, and the hotkey is V. This tool is the path selection tool. And if I hold my left mouse button on it, you'll see I actually have two types of selection methods. I have a path selection and a direct selection, both with the hotkey A. And you know now that if you hold Shift, it will cycle through. So the black arrow and the white arrow. So the black arrow will move the shape as a whole, and it will allow you to take even just the corners and move them to where you see fit. So that's all fine and great. The white arrow, or the direct selection tool, allows you to grab specific points on your shape, and I'm going to go ahead and hit yes here. It allows me to create a brand new shape within my scene. And this is really a good tool when you're starting to edit and you're starting to, kind of make those custom shapes to your liking, especially if you're making a game character or some sort of environmental element. This is a good starting point. You can even make some perspective, cubes, you name it, with it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Option Z, and that's the same thing as going to step backwards. And I'm going to undo this. So if you messed up at this point, don't fret. Simply go back to your tool and draw a new square. Now you're going to notice something. When you draw a new square, and I'm going to hit 445, there we go. Every new square I draw I get a new shape. So I can just go and delete those old layers that I don't want, or maybe that I didn't set up to my liking. And then I can use the Path Select tool to move that square back in the middle. So let's try another shape. Now that we have our square, let's try a ellipse tool. Now the ellipse tool, we're going to change the color here. Let's go ahead and pick maybe a light blue. And the first thing you're going to notice is it's changed the shape color, and this can be really distracting to some people. So we don't want it to change the shape color here. So I'm going to have to click away and actually draw the circle first and then change its color. And you'll get used to this as you move forward in the program, but it's, you know, it's pretty easy to kind of get going. I can even use my arrow keys on my keyboard to kind of arrange that shape. So you can see what I've done is I've created two different shapes. I have my ellipse and I have my rectangle. Both are ready to go. We can use the path selection tool if we really want. You can see the ellipse actually has Bezier handles, so it allows us to get a little more of a organic flow to it. And we'll talk a little later on how to get those handles on a shape that's linear like the cube. So I can go ahead and make my shape, and all is well and dandy. Now, this is where most people stop, but shapes are way more powerful within Adobe Photoshop. So what I can actually do, and those of you who are familiar with Adobe Illustrator know about something called the Pathfinder, is I can actually go to my layer and play with combining shapes. So as I look at the shapes in my scene, I can actually go to that layer and play with them. But you'll see it's grayed out. If you don't have them selected, and I'm holding the Shift key to do that, and I go to Layer, Combine Shapes, now I can unite them. And you'll see now I have one shape. But within that one shape, I still have manipulation and control of the various shaped elements. So I can kind of make it this way. Now they all turn the same color, and that's perfectly fine. I can do subtract from shape, so I can start using these tools in the top toolbar now to intersect to make my own custom shape itself. So this can be really cool as a tool to kind of get you guys to realize, like, you know, custom shapes to make. So I'm gonna hit yes, and now I have this pretty neat custom shaped area, and there you are. So getting to know your shapes and getting to know how they interact with one another is a very important concept, because as you're going to find out in future assignments, shape has everything to do with likability and character design and appeal to the games and characters that you create. So to start, you're going to have to start, whether you're sketching or using a digital tool, with shapes. So here's your shape right here. Everything looks pretty decent, but we could do so much more. So what we're going to do now is just close this down. You're not going to need this right now. So we're going to hit close, and I want you to open the provided file that I have given you. So I want you to do a File, Open, and we're going to open a raster image of a robin bird. And I'm going to double click on that, and there's my bird. So you can see it's a background image, pretty clean, white background, kind of the bird in the middle here. And we're going to go ahead and silhouette this, because at this point, you know, it becomes a bit difficult, and I could do it, but I could drag, you know, shapes and mold them and manipulate them, but that becomes a bit hard to do. So let's go ahead and make our own silhouette, and this time we're going to use the tool people are most afraid of. It's called the pen tool. And the reason people are afraid of this tool is they're just don't understand really how to use it. So we're going to go to the pen tool, and with the pen tool, what will happen is it will create something called a path, and that path will act as a shape. So before I start using my pen tool, I can actually determine whether it fills it in with a color or it simply draws a invisible path or cut with the tool. For our sake, we're going to use the shape. So let's go ahead and figure out how this tool works. So before we really get started, I'm going to just work in this white area. So this is just a play around, so you don't have to worry about messing up here. But I'm going to go ahead and draw a triangle. And as I draw that triangle, if I just let it go right now, you can see that there's really not a line over here. So if I go to the very starting point, I get that little circle, and now I have a triangle. I can also hold down that tool, and I can look at all the other options it gives me. My pen tool will allow me to delete an anchor point, which didn't really do me much good there. It'll allow me to add an anchor point, so I can pull that out and make it a more organic shape, and then we can delete it if we don't like it. And it'll also allow me, if I hold my Alt key, to add Bezier curves to specific points, and also remove those Bezier curves. And this is a really nice tool, especially for those who are attempting to work, and I'm going to go back to my move tool here, to work in kind of vector-esque kind of drawings. So you can start making some pretty custom shapes here. If you don't like what you do, just select it and hit delete. All right, so how do we use this pen tool to create a really custom shape? Well, the pen tool is one of the most powerful tools in our arsenal. So what we're going to do, and this is the assignment for you for this project, is I want you to make a silhouette of what you see on the screen. And so I'm going to go ahead and, you know, most people will sit here and draw tons of little points, but I want you to remember your pen tool is pretty powerful. So if you draw a point and then drag and then aim the handle, you can actually get some pretty cool things. But then you're going to get to a point where that handle just doesn't want to cooperate. And so if I hold my Alt key here, it actually removes, and I just click my Alt key once, it removes that handle. So I can kind of go through and, you know, try to draw as least points as possible. And, you know, if worse comes to worse, you can always use your undo tool in here. So we're going to go here, and then we're losing this a little bit, so I'm going to come back. And as you can see, I'm just kind of slowly but surely drawing down this animal. So if I hold the space bar and let go, click, hold and drag at least, it will actually move my hand tool, so it'll allow me a little more control over this. So I'm going to go to here. I can go to my Z tool and use the Alt key to zoom out. So I hold down the Alt key and continue to draw this. This is a pretty easy part, as you can see. Z key again, zoom in. And a lot of people don't take the time to do this. And P is your pen tool. So a really good way to do this is to kind of go in and just make sure that you know your hotkeys. And for the most time, they're pretty obvious. So we'll go here, hold that Alt key. 9 times out of 10, the Shift, Command, Control, Alt keys, depending on what platform you're using, will work. And these keys are pretty much the same in any program. So if I click away, no big deal. I just get my arrow key again, there it is, and then I can get my pen tool and simply click on the last point that I laid off on and start drawing again. So what I want you to do is just really master this pen tool, because the most important part of a shape or a character, which you guys are going to learn, is actually the it kind of defines the character itself. So shape is extraordinarily important in game design. And if I miss it, it's not a big deal, because I can always kind of come in and I can adjust those later, which I'll show you. Oh, don't want to do that. I want to hold that Alt key or that Option key and draw this out. Use my Z key to zoom out a little bit. P for pen again, and go from there. Now there's many ways I could have selected this path, and I will show you those ways. They're pretty easy. I could have used the magic wand tool. I could use some other masking methods, but for your sake, I want you to get very comfortable with the pen tool, so you can kind of go in, and I'll turn my opacity down here so I can start adjusting like I told you, and you can have a very sharp line for this. So if you see you need to add more points, just go in with the pen tool. Remember, A is your hotkey for the other tools, and kind of draw out these specific points. And we're getting pretty good here. Your pen tool is, so to speak, the sharpest knife in your arsenal. It works way better than the magic wand tool. When you guys all get into industry, you're going to realize this really quickly, especially when it comes to, you know, trying to get a sharp cut out of things. And I think that looks pretty good. So there's my cutout. So at this point, now I have a shape that is in the form of my bird. You can see it's a very organic shape. It looks like a bird on a wire. It's pretty specific. I could go in and play around with it a little bit more. I could go in and subtract some areas. So let's go ahead and do that, because the one main area we need to do is we need to take out this area. So how do we do that? All right, so let's draw another shape. And what we can do is use that pen tool again, and on a brand new layer, draw this shape. Now notice I'm not trying any fancy tricks here. I want you all to be comfortable with this. But as we did in the beginning of the lesson, what we can actually do is subtract from shapes. So I can go to Layer, Combine Shapes. I could unite them. If I subtract the front shape, well, I'm going to lose all the shapes. If I move this shape by just clicking and dragging the layer above it, select the two, and I do a subtract front shape, check that out. Now I have the hole cut out. So let's go back and let me show you that again. So what I did was I just drew my own shape, and this is the shape that I drew. It's kind of the negative space that's in there. I held my left mouse button down, I dragged that to the very top of the layer stack, made sure my eyeball was on. I held shift and I clicked on both the shape 2 and shape 1 layers, went to Layer, Combine Shapes, subtract the front shape, and voila, check that out. Now we have a pretty cool kind of breakdown of what it is. So what I'd like you all to do is I'd like you to make this shape for me. And by making this shape, it will show me that you kind of understand silhouetting and form and attention to detail, and I want it to be as close to this shape as possible. Now, don't cut any corners on this. Use the pen tool. I'll know if you didn't use the pen tool. In the end, it's really on you all to kind of master these different forms. So at this point, what I could actually do is I'm going to save this. We're going to do a save as, and we're going to save this as a JPEG. And we're going to call this, I'll call this my last name. You call it what you want to call it. Dombrowski bird shape. So you can name it your last name, bird shape. I'll go ahead and hit save. I want it to be maximum. Now what's going to happen, don't worry, is because it's a JPEG, this is going to turn white. So you're going to see this is going to be the outcome of what you have. So this is what you want to turn in for the first assignment. It should look just like this. You need to use my bird image, and you need to make sure that the shape is as close as possible to that original picture. You're going to save it as a JPEG with your last name, birdshape.jpg, and again, that's just through File, Save As, Format. Make sure you're not using Photoshop. Make sure you go down to JPEG and go from there. Now, if you want to save a Photoshop file, Photoshop files will actually retain layer information. So if I wanted to, I could call this bird layered, and if I wanted to come back to this, I could just simply save it as a Photoshop file, hit OK, and now I'll have those individual layers. And so what I could really do at this point is I could go ahead and start adding some gradient overlays. I could add a lot of really cool things. So, we could add some really gross colors, whatever we see fit. We can add color in here, start blending it, and we can do a lot of fun stuff. But for now, I want you to master that shape tool. I want you to understand the cutout method and so forth. You can also do this in Adobe Illustrator for those who really like Adobe Illustrator, but for this first assignment, I really want you to get comfortable in Photoshop. and you'll be practicing this more and more in the end. So that's the assignment. I want you guys to kind of cut out this bird shape and go from there. And you now know how to kind of manipulate and create shapes using the pen tool, and manipulate shapes using the custom shape tool in Adobe Photoshop. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I can't wait to see your progress.